And you know, we can share your pride and feel your enthusiasm in the studio, following what you monitored yesterday. Yeah, what you monitored because you were at the polling unit. And we also saw will I say, the enthusiasm on the part of Nigerians to also ensure that that process went well. But if we're to talk specifically on the use of the card reader, would you advise same for the governorship elections, which is holding in less than 2 weeks from today?
I think the election, the administrator of that's INEC has got to ask itself some pretty honest questions. I don't. The important thing is this: look, there are people who are ideologically opposed to the card reader because they see the card reader as interfering with their commitment to voodoo manufacture or to the manufacture of voodoo outcomes in elections. And I don't think that is the right attitude. I do think that we need to continue to improve the situation. I also do think, quite honestly, that the card reader was not as well tested as it should have been, and that the operators were not as skilled and educated in the mechanics of the card reader. Basic failures occurred yesterday that should not have occurred. But you know what? In pretty much all of those, you had Nigerian citizens again willing to make sacrifice and to contribute to making it better. So you had people providing generators to power up things. You had people providing cleansing spirits to make sure that the thumbs could be read. You had people helping to read the manuals to make sure the thing could be operated. The lesson here is this, that INEC should trust Nigerians. And INEC should be honest with Nigerians. And if it is honest with Nigerians, Nigerians are willing to cut it some slack to make sure we get our systems right. We've made tremendous progress. INEC has been instrumental to that, and we should appreciate the sacrifices and work INEC has done. There is a lot more yet to do.
Now, we're also looking at what will come out. How do you see the voter turnout? I know that where you also voted, you must have seen quite a number of people show up. But what do you think will happen in terms of figures for the voter turnout, especially in places where hitches were experienced?
The enthusiasm of people, there are places that completed counting this morning, for instance. There were places that started voting around midnight. In where, for instance, in Abuja, the finance quarters, a friend had to go to his house, yank his generator, bring it to the place, power up the place, so they could start voting around midnight. The counting finished early hours of this morning. They were all there. Nigerians, north, south, east, west, Christian, Muslim, old, young, male, female, doing what? Supporting one another. And across the country, the turnout was huge. That says, one, Nigerians believe in our country. Two, whenever we're challenged as a country, what do? We rise up, because this country has to be here for us all. Number three, Nigerians want to live together. Number four, Nigerians believe in democracy. And number five, we want to ask our politicians, join us too. Do you believe in this thing? It's real good. Come along. And so can our politicians please just get off their high horses and do what? Join the ride with Nigerians and make this country work, because we've got a capacity to be great. But are they willing to do that? That's the question we've got to ask them this morning. Respect the outcome of this thing, respect the will of our people, and let's make Nigeria great.
Well, Dr. Fassi, you can hear him. The enthusiasm he's showing, the optimism he's sharing is almost palpable. You can almost touch it. Do you agree with him in almost everything he said?
Well, in almost everything, but not in all parameters.
What areas don't you agree?
We're talking about, he has not talked about the desperation of politicians, because the problem we have...
but that's what he's talking about. He said they should get off their high horses.
Yes, in terms of what? I'm saying that this is not the type of presidential system that we envisage, that is highly monetized in this country. What is the legislature doing with constituency allowance? What is the legislature doing with, conferring on itself the power it does not have?
We'll come to that shortly, but let us talk about this order. I mean, in almost all the places that we visited, people showed that, interest to wait till the end of the process.
Yes.
Do you think that we should put that in our laws now, considering will I say, friction it causes almost every time we have a new Inspector General who says, you know, well, it's not in the law, but I advise that you people should vote and go, or that has happened.
You could check for loitering.
In 2011 it happened, in 2015 it's also happening, but considering what has happened over the years, do you think it's also one aspect we should consider and make legal?
No, I think our security chiefs should not be overzealous. Most times they want to play to legality. I think they should be mindful that, look, yes, the oath of allegiance is to this country. Yes, through that man or that woman representing us as president, but he should not be subservient.
Do you think that could create a problem, Captain Aliyu? Do you think that could create a problem for the security agencies? Because obviously, from the point of security, perhaps the less people you have in an area, the easier it is to protect those people. Maybe that's why the security chiefs always advise that you vote and go. But do you think that if it's legislated upon, considering what has happened over the years, could it create a problem for security agencies, for instance?
It depends on where we find ourselves, threat perceptions-wise. If things were optimal, there wasn't really any need to have people disperse. You understand what I'm saying? I have seen areas where elections were held, and you even had flat screens, giant flat screens elected right out there, and people mill around and then monitor what's happening.
In this country?
No, definitely not here. Not here, but those are things we could aspire to. But given the threat levels and the peculiarity of the threat, it wasn't in the interests of the same voters who wanted to cluster to do just that. Now you have to understand something based on what Dr. Yusuf is saying. There is a correlation between what the politicians do and the workload security agencies can anticipate. Why is simple? The direct fallouts of those shortcomings of the politicians create what I want to call the harbingers of the security threats you see. They incubate these security threats. Corruption, irresponsible governance, whatever you see the leader doing is going to create what we can call institutional deficits, and the fallout of which become crime, armed robbery, ethnicity, religious clashes. And at the end of the day, at the end of what I want to call the security value chain is the operative, is the IG and his men, is the chief of army staff and his officers. So at the end of the day, permit me to say, one politician craps it all, and they have to come out and do the cleaning at very high cost to the victims, the populace, resources-wise for the security agencies, lives and property for the security agencies, bereaved families of men who will fall in line of duty. All that could actually follow one person's action.
Well, we'll come back to that. Our correspondents, more coming in from them this time, going back to south of Nigeria, specifically Bayelsa State, where Dobra Timmy Woods is standing by. Dobra, how are you this morning? What exactly is happening in Bayelsa State?
And this is the day after the election, and we're with Dr. Alfred, who is the collection officer, and it brings us up to speed with what's been happening here since the morning.
Well, we did the election yesterday, and we could not finish the collation because a lot of the wards started the voting late. So we walked throughout the night, and this morning we are here trying to finish our jobs. However, there are some units that voting didn't take place, and they are back to the field trying to do the voting again.
How many units?
Like in my units, like in my ward, there are 2 units that wasn't, election did not take place.
What was responsible?
I think there was an issue of hijacking of the material. Okay. According to the coppers, the materials were hijacked, and therefore they were asked to go back to the field because the police timely recovered the material. So they are back to the field. At the same time, some of the people here are continuing the collation process. Most of the people here, voting is over for them. They are doing the collation process.
collation process still continues, and those who were unable to vote yesterday are back on the field, and voting still continues. We'll keep you up to speed with what's going on in Yanagua. I'm Deborah Timiwo, reporting for Channel Television News.
Well, looking a bit tired there, Deborah. I can imagine you stayed up all night. Fatigue is showing all over you, girl. But anyway, many thanks. But moving on, the bad news we just got there. Hijack of materials in a particular unit is causing people to go back to the polls somewhere in Bayelsa State. Dr. Yusuf.
Well, of course, that is restricted to that level. I think we must commend INEC and security agencies, because I mean, you know what's happening in Bayelsa. I mean, that is the home state of the president. The stakes are quite high there, and therefore, I mean, depending on which side you belong, which side of the divide you belong, people want to do things to please their masters.
Well,
even if they were not sent.
That's the overzealousness. And you were going to comment on this?
Yeah, I was going to comment about we're tying this up with when you talked about the activities of the politicians and the effect it has on the electorate and the nation as a whole.
Yes.
Let's see if we can bring it, Professor Dinkalu. The activities of the politicians vis-a-vis the issue in Bayelsa State, hijacking of materials, and now they have to go back to the polls, and the effect it has on the nation and the electorate. He talked about, Dr. Yusuf talked about the fact that, yes, the politicians are taking on too much onto themselves. What's happening with the legislation, the laws? How do we get out of this, permit me to use the word, quagmire?
Sorry, what's the quagmire?
Activities of the politicians who are taking on too much onto themselves, the legislations that are giving them supposedly having too much of power or monetize too much of money in the polity of Nigeria, so that they now carry on with themselves with impunity, and it affects the nation negatively.
You know, Nigeria is a pretty diverse place, and it's difficult. Let's be careful about generalizing about the patterns in different parts of the country. I spent a heck of a lot of time around the country in this cycle of elections, and I spent a considerable amount of time in the Niger Delta. Speaking across the board and meeting communities across the board, politicians, civil servants, some pretty dangerous characters, security agencies, and the lot. And the political economy of the Niger Delta is different from the political economy of the Southwest or of the North. And over the last 10 years, or a little less, the political economy of the Niger Delta has seen a massive spike in two things. A lot of arms and a lot of money. The arms predate the money. The arms came in, over the past 20 years, particularly the Abacha regime, destroyed civic advocacy and organizing in the Delta and replaced it with arms and violence. And the traffic in arms has grown since then. And then the amnesty program brought in money to buy out the arms. It kept the money there, but did not quite succeed in buying out the arms. And so around these elections, it's not just the politicians we should be looking at. There are also lots of election cults and militias. There are tremendous militias who are very armed in the Niger Delta, and they are selling casual violence to political operatives who are willing to buy it in return for money. But a lot of them are also invested in particular outcomes in the elections because they believe those outcomes guarantee their continued access to unprintable sums of money. And that's why I think we've got to try and understand our local political economies. The Niger Delta's political economy is unique in this country, and we need to try and understand how that is impacting on our elections and on our politics, because it presents us with long-term problems that we've got. Whoever wins these elections has got to be willing to invest in. Just as we've got to be willing to invest in the long-term issues in the Northeast. The fact that education and enlightenment has been destroyed in the Northeast, access for young women and girls to education has been destroyed, and we've got to make a major project of reconstructing that. But I don't want to generalize about Nigerian politics and politicians. There are good, bad, and ugly ones, and terrible ones too. And the important thing is that they're all Nigerians, and we've got to make the good have got to invest in bringing up the not so good.